Welcome to Life Stories, where we share inspiring tales of courage, redemption, and transformation. Today, we bring you a story set in the tranquil Clearwater Bay Marina, where a father and daughter's quiet life is upended by a dangerous biker gang. But what begins as a confrontation soon becomes a journey of second chances and profound change. Join us as we explore how one man's quiet strength and unwavering belief in redemption sparked a ripple effect that transformed not just lives but an entire community. Subscribe to Life Stories to start today's journey. You won't want to miss it. It was the kind of morning Clearwater Bay Marina was famous for, a perfect stillness in the air. The faint scent of salt water mixing with pine from the nearby forest. The bay reflected the soft, golden hues of dawn, broken only by the occasional ripple of fish darting beneath its surface. Emily Harris stood at the edge of her father's dock, her hands expertly coiling a thick rope as she prepared their small fleet of fishing boats for the day. At 23, she was as much a part of the marina as the weathered planks beneath her feet, having grown up here under the watchful eye of her father, Sam. Sam Harris was a quiet man. To the locals, he was just the steady, dependable owner of Clearwater Bay's modest charter fishing business. He was known for his kind smile, his way of listening more than speaking, and his uncanny ability to predict the weather with just a glance at the horizon. But what the locals didn't know, and what even Emily rarely thought about, was that her father had a past. A past spent in places far more dangerous than this sleepy coastal town, in roles that demanded more from him than most people could imagine. To her, he was simply Dad. Emily's breath puffed in soft clouds in the cool morning air as she worked, her thoughts drifting to the families they'd take out on the water later that day. She loved seeing their faces light up when they reeled in their first catch, their laughter ringing across the bay. This was the life she cherished, simple, peaceful, and filled with the quiet joys of connection and nature. But peace is fragile. And that morning, it shattered. The low growl of engines began as a faint disturbance on the edge of her awareness, growing louder with every second. Emily's hands froze mid-motion, her eyes lifting to the gravel road leading to the marina. 5 motorcycles emerged from the morning haze, their chrome glinting in the sun like a predator's teeth. The riders wore leather jackets adorned with insignias she recognized all too well, the Iron Jackals. The stories about them were whispered around town, tales of extortion and violence. They never lingered in Clearwater Bay long, just passing through like a storm cloud, darkening the atmosphere wherever they went. Yet now, here they were, roaring into her sanctuary. The bikes came to a halt in the marina's lot, their engines cutting off with a menacing silence. The leader, Jackson Rogue Taylor, dismounted first. He was tall and lean, his sharp features accentuated by a network of scars that seemed to tell their own story. He moved with the casual arrogance of someone who knew he commanded fear. His second-in-command, Blake Tank Reynolds, followed, a hulking man with a scowl as heavy as his frame. The others fanned out, their presence transforming the serene marina into something that felt wrong, violated. Emily straightened her spine, clutching the rope in her hands as if it could shield her. She wasn't sure if it was fear or determination that kept her voice steady as she called out, "This is private property. If you're not here for a charter, I'll have to ask you to leave." Rogue's lips curled into a mocking grin as he strode closer. "Private property," he echoed, his voice carrying a deliberate slowness, like a snake coiling before it strikes. "Sweetheart, the Iron Jackals don't ask permission." The tension in the air was suffocating, but Emily refused to step back. Her mind raced for options, knowing her father was still out on the water. From the corner of her eye, she caught movement in the marina office. Mike Henderson, their longtime friend and dockhand, peeking through the blinds, his face pale as he reached for the phone. "You don't belong here," Emily said firmly, her grip on the rope tightening. She hoped her voice sounded braver than she felt. "Leave now." Or what?" Rogue interrupted, stepping into her space. He reached out, trailing a finger along the rope in her hands. "Your daddy going to come save you?" It was the taunt. The insinuation. That broke something in her. "He won't need to," she shot back. Her voice sharp. "You don't know who you're dealing with." For a moment, Rogue's smirk faltered, his eyes narrowing as if he were sizing her up. But before he could respond, the low hum of a boat engine rose in the distance. Emily's heart leaped. She knew that sound better than anything. Her father was coming. The gang turned to watch as Sam's boat approached the dock, gliding smoothly over the water. From the helm, he looked like the same unassuming fisherman the jackals had likely dismissed without a second thought. But Emily could see it in his eyes. Even from this distance, the sharp focus. The quiet calculations. He wasn't just coming back from a fishing lesson. He was preparing for something far more serious. Rogue sneered. Well, Daddy's home." The gang turned their attention back to Emily, blocking her path as her father's boat docked. She could feel the weight of the moment pressing on her. Everything about her father, the man she'd known all her life and the man she was only now beginning to understand, was about to come into focus. As Sam stepped onto the dock, his movements calm and deliberate, Emily's fear eased, replaced by something else entirely: trust. She didn't know what was about to happen, but she knew this much. Her father was here, and whatever the iron jackals thought they'd found, they were about to discover just how wrong they were. The moment Sam Harris stepped onto the dock, the atmosphere shifted. He wasn't trying to intimidate anyone, his movements were unhurried, his expression unreadable, but there was a palpable weight to his presence. Emily stood frozen, caught between relief and trepidation, her heart hammering in her chest. Sam tied off his boat with practiced efficiency, his back to the iron jackals as though they weren't even worth acknowledging. To them, it might have looked like carelessness, but Emily knew better. Every move her father made was deliberate, calculated. He was assessing the situation, noting the positions of each biker, cataloguing potential threats. Finally, he turned to her, his voice calm and steady. "Emily," he said, as though nothing unusual was happening. "Everything all right here?" Before she could respond, Rogue stepped forward, his smirk returning. "She's been entertaining us," he drawled. "Quite a spirited little thing you've got here." Sam's eyes shifted to Rogue, his gaze steady and unflinching. He didn't speak right away, letting the silence stretch long enough to make the biker leader shift his weight. "I see," Sam said finally. "And you are?" Rogue barked a laugh, the sound sharp and mocking. "You don't know who I am?" He spread his arms, gesturing to his crew. "We're the Iron Jackals. This whole region knows us." Sam's gaze swept over the group, then returned to Rogue, his expression unchanging. "Never heard of you." Emily bit back a smile despite the tension. Rogue's cocky grin faltered, his jaw tightening. He took another step forward, deliberately invading Sam's space. "That a fact? Well, let me educate you. We go where we want, take what we want. That's how it works." Sam tilted his head slightly, as if considering this. "Is that so?" The quiet tone of his voice made Rogue bristle. "Yeah, that's so. And right now, what we want is a piece of this place. Seems like a nice spot for some new management. What do you think about that?" "Old man?" Emily saw her father's hand flex slightly, a barely perceptible movement that only someone who knew him well would notice. "I think," he said, his voice still level, "you're making a mistake." Rogue's amusement evaporated, replaced by something colder. "And why's that?" Sam stepped forward, closing the distance between them. He was shorter than Rogue, slighter in build, but the difference in presence was staggering. "Because you're under the impression that strength comes from numbers, from making people afraid of you." He paused, letting the words sink in. "But real strength doesn't need to prove itself." The bikers shifted uneasily, exchanging glances. Even Tank, the largest of the group, seemed to hesitate. But Rogue wasn't one to back down. Especially not in front of his crew. He laughed again. Louder this time. As though trying to fill the growing silence. You talk a big game for a guy with no backup. Sam's expression didn't change. Are you sure about that? The distant wail of sirens reached their ears. Faint but unmistakable. Emily's breath caught as she realized Mike must have called the sheriff. Rogue's head turned slightly toward the sound. His confidence flickering. Looks like your time here is up. Sam said evenly. Rogue's eyes snapped back to Sam, his face twisting with anger. We'll see about that. He lunged forward. Fast and aggressive. But Sam was faster. In a blur of movement. He sidestepped. Grabbing Rogue's arm and twisting it behind his back. The biker let out a grunt of pain as he was forced to his knees. The other bikers reacted instinctively. But Sam's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. Don't. There was something in his tone, calm but commanding, that froze them in place. Even Tank, who had started to move forward, stopped in his tracks. Emily's pulse raced as she watched her father. Her fear replaced by awe. He didn't raise his voice or threaten them. He didn't need to. The Iron Jackals, who had swaggered onto the dock so confidently, now stood uncertain. Their leader subdued. Sam released Rogue, stepping back smoothly. You have two choices, he said. His voice carrying the same quiet authority. Leave now and take this as a lesson. Or stay and make another mistake. The sirens grew louder. And the bikers hesitated. Their bravado cracking under the weight of the moment. Rogue climbed to his feet. His face flushed with humiliation and fury. He opened his mouth to respond. But the sound of approaching vehicles cut him off. Emily turned to see Sheriff Tucker's cruiser pull into the marina lot. Followed by two others. The sheriff stepped out. His hand resting on his holstered weapon. His gaze swept over the scene. Taking in the bikers. Sam and Emily. What's going on here? Tucker asked. His voice calm but firm. Rogue glanced at the sheriff. Then back at Sam. His jaw tightened. But he didn't speak. Just a misunderstanding. Sam said. His tone light. These gentlemen were just leaving. The sheriff's eyes lingered on Sam for a moment before shifting to Rogue. Is that right? Rogue's lips pressed into a thin line. And after a long pause, he gave a sharp nod. Yeah, that's right. As the bikers mounted their motorcycles, Emily felt a rush of relief. But as Rogue turned to look at her father one last time, she couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. For a while, things at Clearwater Bay Marina returned to normal, or so it seemed. The Iron Jackals were gone. The sheriff had taken their details. And Emily had tried to shake off the lingering unease of that morning. She threw herself into work. Her hands steady as she coiled ropes and prepped the boats for their next charter. Sam carried on as he always did. Unbothered on the surface. His calm demeanor a steadying presence for everyone around him. But Emily knew her father too well. Beneath his quiet exterior, she could sense the weight of what had happened. She noticed it in the way his eyes lingered on the horizon a little longer, as though scanning for an unseen threat, or how he seemed to assess every car that pulled into the lot. Sam Harris wasn't a man who left things to chance. And though he never said a word, Emily understood, he was waiting. It wasn't long before that waiting turned into reality. The evening was calm, the sky painted in soft pinks and purples as the sun dipped below the horizon. Emily stood at the edge of the dock, savoring the peaceful view. Sam was nearby, securing the last of the boats. His movements deliberate as always. She was about to call out to him when the distant rumble of engines broke the stillness. Her stomach tightened. She turned toward the sound, her eyes narrowing as a line of headlights appeared on the road leading to the marina. Not 5 bikes this time. At least a dozen. Their engines roaring like a storm rolling in. Dad, she called. Her voice shaking despite her best effort to stay calm. Sam was already looking in the direction of the approaching gang. His expression didn't change. But Emily could see his body tense. his stance shifting ever so slightly as he turned to face her. "Inside. Emily," he said quietly. "But now." There was no arguing with that tone. Emily hurried into the marina office, her heart pounding as she locked the door behind her. From the window, she watched as the bikers pulled into the lot, their numbers even more intimidating up close. At the head of the group was Jackson Rogue Taylor, his sharp features twisted into a scowl. Behind him was Blake Tank Reynolds, his massive frame unmistakable, and several new faces that Emily didn't recognize. These men looked rougher, meaner, their leather jackets adorned with patches that spoke of violence and chaos. Sam stood at the edge of the dock, his hands in his pockets, as though greeting old acquaintances. Rogue dismounted his bike, his boots crunching on the gravel as he approached. "You thought this was over," he called out, his voice dripping with venom. "I was hoping it was," Sam replied evenly. "Hope's a funny thing." Rogue sneered. "Makes people stupid. You made a fool of me back there, Harris. In front of my crew, my club. That's not something I let slide." Sam tilted his head slightly, his expression unreadable. "You're here to fix your pride, then?" Rogue's smirk widened, but there was no humor in it. "I'm here to make an example. You don't cross the iron jackals and walk away." The gang began to spread out, creating a loose semicircle around Sam. Emily's pulse quickened as she watched her father, her hands gripping the edge of the desk so tightly her knuckles turned white. He didn't move, didn't flinch, but she could see it, the subtle shift in his posture, the way his feet were planted firmly. "Ready. You've got numbers this time," Sam said, his voice calm as ever. "That's new." Rogue laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "Yeah. And what have you got? That old dockhand of yours? The sheriff's half-hour away. You're on your own, old man." But Rogue didn't know Sam Harris. Not really. Sam's eyes flicked to the office window for the briefest moment. And Emily understood. He wasn't just standing there, he was buying time. She scanned the room, her eyes landing on the radio. Her father always kept it set to the sheriff's frequency, just in case. She grabbed it, her hands trembling as she pressed the button. "This is Emily Harris at Clearwater Bay Marina," she whispered, trying to keep her voice steady. "We need help. The iron jackals are back." She paused, counting the bikes as quickly as she could. "At least a dozen of them." Sheriff Tucker's voice crackled back almost immediately. "We're on our way. Stay inside." Emily exhaled shakily, clutching the radio like a lifeline. From her vantage point, she could see her father and Rogue facing off, the tension between them palpable. "You still have a choice," Sam said, his voice low. "You can walk away. No one gets hurt." Rogue's grin vanished, replaced by a sneer. "You don't get it, do you? This isn't about walking away. It's about making sure everyone knows who's in charge." Sam sighed, a faint note of regret in the sound. "I was afraid you'd say that." The bikers tensed, ready to pounce. Emily's heart slammed against her ribs as she watched, unable to tear her eyes away. Her father didn't move, but she knew it was about to begin. The air at Clearwater Bay Marina grew heavy with tension as the iron jackals tightened their circle around Sam Harris. Emily watched from the office window, her heart racing with every step the bikers took toward her father. The roar of their engines had stopped, but the silence was far more menacing. It pressed down on her, filling the space with unspoken threats. From where she stood, Emily could see the subtle way Sam shifted his weight, his feet steady on the weathered planks of the dock. He wasn't nervous, he wasn't even rattled. There was a calmness about him, a quiet confidence that seemed to cut through the bravado of the bikers who loomed over him. "Last chance, old man," Rogue growled, his voice filled with venom. "You've got no backup, no weapons, just you, standing there like you've already lost. Walk away now, and maybe we won't make this worse for your little girl." At the mention of her, Emily's stomach dropped. But her father didn't so much as blink. Instead, he tilted his head, his expression one of faint amusement. You don't understand what you're doing, do you? Rogue's scowl deepened, and he took another step forward. What's there to understand? You embarrassed me, and now you're going to pay for it. Embarrassed you? Sam repeated, his voice calm, almost conversational. No, Rogue. You embarrassed yourself. And now, instead of cutting your losses, you've dragged your men back here, thinking more numbers will make a difference. But it won't. Rogue laughed bitterly, the sound echoing across the dock. Oh yeah, and why's that? Sam's gaze swept over the gang, taking in their faces. Some of them looked less certain now, their postures hesitant. Because strength isn't about intimidation. It's about control, discipline. And from where I'm standing, you're in short supply of both. Before Rogue could respond, one of the bikers lunged forward, perhaps trying to prove his leader's strength. It was a mistake. In a movement so quick Emily almost missed it, Sam sidestepped the attack, grabbing the biker's arm and twisting it effortlessly behind his back. With a firm shove, he sent the man stumbling forward, his momentum carrying him face-first into the side of the dock. The sound of the impact echoed across the marina, and the biker crumpled to the ground, groaning. The gang froze, their bravado faltering as they stared at their fallen comrade. Rogue's eyes narrowed, his jaw tightening. You've got moves, old man, he said, his voice low. But it's still 1 against 12. That's true. Sam replied evenly, but numbers don't mean much if you don't know how to use them. The tension snapped as 2 more bikers charged at once. Emily clutched the radio in her hand. Her breath caught in her throat. But her father was ready. The first biker swung a fist, aiming for Sam's head. But Sam ducked. His movements precise and fluid. He caught the man's wrist and twisted, forcing him to drop the knife he'd been holding. Before the second biker could react, Sam swept his leg out, knocking him off balance. The 2 men ended up sprawled on the ground, their pride more bruised than their bodies. Enough, Rogue barked, his frustration evident. He turned to Tank, who had yet to move from his spot. What are you waiting for? Handle this. Tank hesitated, his gaze flicking between Sam and Rogue. He was the largest of them all, a mountain of a man, and his presence alone had always been enough to intimidate. But now, standing before Sam, he seemed unsure. You don't have to do this, Sam said, his voice quiet but firm. You're following a man who doesn't understand what real leadership looks like. Is that who you want to be? The words hung in the air, and for a moment, Tank didn't move. Then, slowly, he took a step back, his massive shoulders slumping as he lowered his gaze. I'm out, he muttered, his voice barely audible. Rogue spun to face him, his fury palpable. What did you just say? I said I'm out, Tank repeated, louder this time. This isn't what I signed up for. I'm not doing this. The crack in the gang's unity was sudden and visible. Several other bikers shifted uncomfortably, their loyalty to Rogue wavering in the face of Sam's quiet strength and Tank's defiance. You're making a mistake, Rogue hissed, his voice shaking with barely contained rage. No, Sam said, his gaze steady on Rogue, his finally making the right choice. The sound of approaching sirens broke through the tension, growing louder by the second. Emily's chest filled with a mix of relief and pride as she realized help was moments away. This isn't over, Rogue snarled, his hands clenching into fists. Oh, it's over, Sam replied, his tone final. For you. It is. The sheriff's cruisers pulled into the lot, their lights flashing. The bikers hesitated, glancing at each other as the reality of their situation sank in. Rogue looked like he wanted to fight, but even he knew when the odds were against him. One by one, the iron jackals lowered their heads and surrendered. The flashing lights from Sheriff Tucker's cruisers painted Clearwater Bay Marina in bursts of red and blue. The once daunting figures of the Iron Jackals were now diminished. Their heads bowed as they were corralled into a loose line by deputies. The gang that had stormed in with roaring engines and overwhelming confidence was now silent, the weight of their choices settling heavily on their shoulders. Emily stepped out of the marina office as the last of the bikers were searched and restrained. She moved cautiously, her eyes darting to her father, who stood calmly by the dock as though the chaos of the past hour hadn't touched him. Sheriff Tucker approached Sam, his hand resting lightly on his holstered weapon. "I should have guessed we'd find you in the middle of this," Tucker said, his voice a mix of exasperation and admiration. "Looks like you handled things, again. Just kept things from escalating," Sam replied, his tone neutral. "They made their choices, now they face the consequences." Tucker nodded, glancing at Rogue, who stood apart from the rest, his jaw clenched and his eyes blazing with fury. "This one's got a reputation for holding grudges. I'll make sure he's locked up tight." Sam's gaze flicked to Rogue, his expression unreadable. "It's not just about locking them up. They need a chance to figure out why they got here in the first place. Otherwise, it's just a cycle." Tucker raised an eyebrow. "You're telling me these guys deserve a second chance after what they've done?" Sam's response was immediate and steady. "I'm saying some of them might be ready to change. It's worth trying to help the ones who are." Emily watched the exchange, feeling a swell of pride. Her father wasn't just strong, he was principled. He believed in redemption, even for people like the Iron Jackals. A deputy approached, tugging Tank forward. The big man's face was a mask of shame, but there was something else there too, relief. Maybe even hope. "This one asked to speak with you," the deputy said, directing his words to Sam. Tank looked up, his shoulders sagging as he met Sam's eyes. "I'm done with this life," he said, his voice rough but sincere. "What you said, it got to me. I don't want to be that guy anymore." Sam nodded slowly. "It's not going to be easy. You've made enemies, burned bridges. But if you're serious, there are people who can help." Tank hesitated, then glanced toward the other bikers, most of whom still looked defiant or resigned. "What about them?" "That's up to them," Sam said. "But change starts with one person deciding they're done making excuses." Tank straightened slightly, the weight of his decision settling over him. "What do I have to do?" Sam turned to Tucker. "You still have contacts at the Veteran Outreach Program in Portland?" Tucker sighed, his skeptical expression softening. "Yeah. But this isn't the usual type they work with. They work with people who need direction." Sam replied. "He's a veteran, isn't he?" Tank nodded, his gaze falling. "Army. 2 tours in Afghanistan." Tucker looked at the big man for a long moment, then pulled out his phone. "I'll make the call. But Harris, if this backfires." "It won't," Sam said confidently. Emily watched as Tank was led away, her heart tugging between hope and doubt. "Dad," she said softly, "do you really think someone like him can change?" Sam turned to her, his eyes kind but firm. "It's not about what I think. It's about what he chooses. If he's willing to put in the work, there's a chance. And sometimes, that's all people need, a chance." The deputies began loading the rest of the Iron Jackals into patrol cars. Rogue resisted, his voice a venomous hiss as he locked eyes with Sam. "This isn't over," he spat. "You hear me? You're dead. Harris. You and your little girl." Emily tensed, but Sam didn't react. His calm demeanor seemed to sap the power from Rogue's threats. Tucker stepped between them, his hand tightening on Rogue's arm. "That's enough. You'll have plenty of time to think about your bad decisions behind bars." As the patrol cars pulled away, taking the gang with them, the marina fell quiet again. The calm that had returned felt fragile, as though it could be shattered at any moment. Emily moved to her father's side, her arms crossed against the evening chill. "What now?" she asked. Sam looked out over the water, his expression contemplative. Now we wait and see who's ready to step up. The ones who want to change will find their way. The ones who don't, they'll make their own mistakes again. But we've planted the seed. That's the first step. Emily followed his gaze. The soft lapping of the waves soothing her nerves. She didn't know if Tank or any of the others would follow through. But standing next to her father, she found herself believing it might be possible. Sometimes, change started with one moment of clarity and the courage to act on it. The days that followed were quieter, but the unease lingered like an echo at Clearwater Bay Marina. For Emily, the memory of Rogue's venomous threats replayed in her mind, especially when the night fell and shadows stretched long across the dock. Her father, as always, seemed unshaken. He carried on his routines with the same steady precision. But Emily could see the extra vigilance in his every move. Sam Harris never let his guard down, not when there was still unfinished business. The morning after the confrontation, a letter arrived. Sheriff Tucker had dropped it off personally, his face drawn with skepticism as he handed it to Sam. It was from Tank, the largest and most conflicted of the Iron Jackals. Emily stood by as her father opened it. Her curiosity mingled with caution. The handwriting was rough, as though the words had been carved out rather than written. Dear Mr. Harris, I don't know if you believe me when I said I was done, but I meant it. They've got me in the program now, and it's hard. Harder than I thought it'd be. But something you said keeps sticking in my head. Change starts with one person deciding they're done making excuses. I've been making excuses my whole life. My dad was tough on me, the army messed me up, the world's unfair. All true. But none of it changes who I am. I can't undo the things I've done. But I can decide what kind of man I want to be from here on out. I don't know if I'll get it right. But I'm going to try. Thank you for seeing something in me when I couldn't. Tank, Blake Reynolds. Sam folded the letter carefully and set it on the kitchen table. Emily watched his face, searching for a reaction. Well, she prompted. Sam leaned back in his chair, his eyes distant but thoughtful. He's trying, he said simply. Emily frowned. Do you really think it'll stick? I mean, someone like him, can they really change? Sam's gaze shifted to her, steady and unyielding. Change is never easy, Emily. But it starts with wanting to. The rest is up to him. Days turned into weeks, and more updates came from the Veteran Outreach Program in Portland. Marcus, one of Rogue's former lieutenants, had joined the program as well. Following Tank's lead, the two men had been put to work, not just in counseling sessions but also in vocational training, learning trade skills and rebuilding the discipline they'd once known in the military. It wasn't just Tank and Marcus making progress. Several of the other jackals had followed suit, choosing the program over incarceration. Some struggled more than others. But the seeds Sam had planted were taking root. One evening, a second letter arrived. This time from Marcus. Dear Mr. Harris, I wasn't going to write. Figured I didn't have much to say that you'd want to hear. But after talking with Tank, I realized something. You didn't just knock us down that day, you gave us a way to stand back up. For the first time in years, I feel like I'm building something instead of tearing it apart. It's not easy. But every day I get a little closer to being the man I thought I'd lost in the service. Thank you for not giving up on us. Even when we didn't deserve it. Marcus, Cole Mason. Emily read the letter over her father's shoulder, her skepticism softening. Maybe they're serious, she said quietly. Sam gave her a small, knowing smile. Maybe they are. It was hard not to hope. But not every letter brought good news. A week later, word came that Rogue had refused the program. He remained defiant, rejecting the offer of change and doubling down on his resentment. For him, the system was an enemy to fight, and any attempt at rehabilitation was just another battle to win. Emily couldn't say she was surprised. She remembered the look in Rogue's eyes that day on the dock, how tightly he'd clung to his anger. even as everything around him fell apart. "Some people just can't be saved," she said one evening as she and her father watched the sun dip below the horizon. Sam didn't respond immediately. His gaze was fixed on the water, his thoughts unreadable. "Maybe not," he said at last. "But that doesn't mean you stop trying. You never know when someone's ready to listen." The quiet conviction in his voice gave Emily pause. She thought about Tank and Marcus, the letters they'd written, the lives they were trying to rebuild. Her father's belief in them had been a spark, a reminder that even in the darkest corners, there was always a chance for light. As the stars began to appear in the night sky, Emily found herself thinking about the future not just for herself or her father, but for the men who had once been enemies. She didn't know where their paths would lead, but she hoped, for their sake and the community's, that they'd continue forward. In the distance, the faint sound of a boat engine echoed across the bay, steady and reassuring. Clearwater Bay Marina had settled into a fragile calm. The days were routine again, filled with tourists boarding boats for charters, fishermen hauling in their morning catches, and Emily tending to the marina's daily upkeep. Yet beneath the surface, the events of the past weeks lingered, shaping the lives of those connected to the dock in ways both visible and unseen. Word of the changes happening in Portland's veteran outreach program began to spread. Other towns and even some rival biker groups heard about the Iron Jackal's involvement and the possibility of a second chance. For Emily, the letters from Tank and Marcus became something of a ritual. Each new message carried updates about their struggles and progress, gritty honesty mixed with hope. One crisp morning, Emily found her father on the dock, staring out over the water as he often did. The sound of approaching motorcycles broke the quiet, and Emily tensed instinctively. She turned to Sam, who stood unmoving, his gaze steady as two riders rolled into the lot. Unlike the Iron Jackals, these bikers weren't adorned with aggressive insignias or intimidating patches. Their jackets were plain, their movements cautious as they parked and removed their helmets. Emily recognized one of them immediately, Tank. Her father's calm expression didn't falter as the two men approached. "Morning, Mr. Harris," Tank said, his voice subdued but steady. "Tank," Sam replied with a nod. His eyes shifted to the younger man at Tank's side, a wiry figure with a nervous energy. "And you are?" The younger man hesitated, glancing at Tank for reassurance. "Jesse," he said finally. I used to run with the Jackals. But I wasn't there that day." Emily studied him, noting the way his shoulders hunched slightly, as if bracing for judgment. "Why are you here, Jesse?" Sam asked evenly. Jesse fidgeted, his hands gripping the strap of his helmet. "I heard about what happened. About you. And about Tank and Marcus. I didn't think it was real. You know, that guys like us could do something different. But then I saw them trying. And I thought maybe I could try too." The words hung in the air, fragile but earnest. Emily glanced at her father, wondering what he would say. Sam studied Jesse for a long moment before giving a small nod. "It's not easy," he said. "Trying doesn't mean you'll succeed. It means you're willing to fail and try again. Are you ready for that?" Jesse swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. "I think so." Tank stepped in, his presence a steadying force. "He's got a long way to go. But he means it. And I wanted him to meet you, to see where this all started." Sam's gaze shifted back to Tank. "And how are you holding up?" Tank's expression softened. "Better. The program's no joke, it's tough. But I'm starting to see who I could be. Not just who I was." Emily felt a pang of something she couldn't quite name, pride. Maybe. Or hope. These were the same men who had threatened her and her father not long ago. And yet here they were, standing on the same dock, seeking a way forward. "You've got work to do," Sam said, his voice firm but not unkind. "This isn't a stopping point. It's just the beginning." Tank nodded. "I know. But I wanted to say thank you for giving us a chance. For believing we could be more. Emily watched as her father extended his hand. And Tank took it. A handshake that seemed to carry more weight than words ever could. Jessie shifted awkwardly, glancing between the two men. So. What do we do now? Sam's lips twitched into a faint smile. Now you get to work. Every day. You show up and make better choices than the day before. That's how you build something real. Tank and Jessie stayed a while longer, talking with Sam and Emily about the progress in Portland and the plans to expand the program to other areas. Emily found herself drawn into the conversation, her initial wariness giving way to cautious optimism. As the two bikers eventually climbed back onto their motorcycles, Jessie hesitated, looking back at Sam. Do you think? Will it ever feel normal? Not being, like we were? Sam considered the question before answering. Normal isn't a place you go back to, Jessie. It's something you build. Every choice you make, every step you take, it all leads to a new normal. But it's up to you to decide what that looks like. Jessie nodded slowly, his expression thoughtful. As the motorcycles rumbled away, Emily turned to her father. Do you think he'll stick with it? Sam's gaze lingered on the road for a moment before he spoke. That depends. The road to change is long. And it's not straight. But he took the first step. Sometimes. That's all it takes to start. Emily followed his gaze. The rumble of the bikes fading into the distance. She didn't know what the future held for Tank, Jessie, or even Marcus. But for the first time, she allowed herself to believe that the choices her father had inspired might truly make a difference. The weeks following Tank and Jessie's visit brought quiet moments of reflection for Emily and Sam Harris. The letters from Portland continued, and the stories they carried began to paint a picture of genuine transformation. Marcus wrote about organizing veteran support groups, while Tank shared his experiences mentoring others, teaching them the value of discipline and structure. Their words carried a sincerity that surprised Emily. They weren't just surviving, they were rebuilding. But it wasn't only the bikers who were changing. The entire community at Clearwater Bay seemed to shift in subtle but meaningful ways. The marina, once a place where people went about their business with quiet indifference, was becoming something more, a gathering place, a symbol of resilience and second chances. Emily first noticed the difference in the small things. A few local fishermen had offered to help repair one of the older docks. Unprompted, families began spending more time at the marina, their children playing near the water while their parents chatted with Sam and the other workers. The tension that had once clung to the air like fog was lifting, replaced by a sense of belonging. One afternoon, Sheriff Tucker stopped by, his cruiser crunching over the gravel lot as he stepped out with a stack of papers in hand. Emily was coiling ropes on the main dock when she saw him approach her father, his expression more relaxed than usual. Thought you'd want to see this, Tucker said, handing Sam the papers. What is it? Sam asked, taking the stack. Progress reports from the outreach program, Tucker replied. Looks like your little intervention here at the marina has had some ripple effects. They're expanding the program. Got other clubs asking about it too. Sam flipped through the pages, his brows furrowing slightly as he read. They're setting up chapters in 3 other cities, he said, his tone thoughtful. Yeah, Tucker confirmed. Seems like the jackals aren't the only ones looking for a way out. Emily, who had been lingering nearby, couldn't help but interject. Other clubs? Like rival biker gangs? Exactly, Tucker said, nodding. Apparently, word spread about what happened here. People are starting to realize there's a better option than just falling deeper into that life. Emily glanced at her father, whose expression remained calm, though she could see the faintest glimmer of satisfaction in his eyes. You made that happen, Dad, she said softly. Sam shook his head. No, Emily. They made it happen. They chose to take the opportunity. All I did was remind them it was there. But the sheriff wasn't finished. There's more, he said, his tone growing serious. We've got a situation brewing. Razor's been making noise back in his old stomping grounds. He's not happy about the changes happening with the jackals or the program. From what we're hearing, he's trying to start his own club. And it's not looking pretty. Emily's heart sank at the mention of Razor. Do you think he'll come back here? She asked. Tucker shrugged. Hard to say. Men like him, pride runs deep. But I wouldn't put it past him to try something reckless. Just wanted you to be aware. Sam nodded, his jaw tightening slightly. We'll be ready. As Tucker left, the weight of his words hung in the air. Emily knew her father well enough to see the gears turning in his mind. He wouldn't let fear dictate his actions. But he also wouldn't ignore a potential threat. That evening, as the sun set over the marina, Emily and Sam sat on the dock, their legs dangling over the edge. The water reflected the warm hues of the sky, a picture of serenity that belied the storm that might come. Do you think it's over? Emily asked quietly. Sam was silent for a moment, his gaze fixed on the horizon. It's never really over, he said finally. People like Razor, they're stuck in their own cycles. But for the others, for Tank, Marcus, and even Jesse, it's not about Razor anymore. It's about what they do next. Emily nodded, her thoughts drifting to the bikers who had taken those first fragile steps toward change. I hope they keep going, she said. I hope they make it. They've got a chance. Sam replied. That's more than most get. What they do with it, that's up to them. As night fell, the lights of the marina flickered on, casting a warm glow over the docks. In the distance, the faint sound of a motorcycle engine echoed, a reminder of the world beyond Clearwater Bay. But here, in this small corner of the world, there was hope that even the hardest hearts could find their way back to something better. Emily leaned her head against her father's shoulder, her thoughts filled with the stories of redemption they had witnessed. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, she felt like it might be something worth looking forward to. As the stars blanketed the sky over Clearwater Bay Marina, the waters lay still, reflecting the journey that had unfolded here. What began as a confrontation had grown into something far greater, a story of redemption, resilience, and the power of second chances. Tank, Marcus, and others like them were proof that even in the darkest moments, people could choose a better path. Sam and Emily Harris stood together on the dock, their bond stronger than ever. The echoes of change surrounded them in the letters from Portland, the transformed lives, and the community that now thrived. But this wasn't the end. It was a beginning. Stories like these remind us that change is possible and hope is never out of reach. Subscribe to Life Stories for more inspiring tales of transformation, courage, and the moments that define us. Don't miss what's next.